Hello. Passionate about sustainability, energy, and climate? You're in the right place. Welcome to Energetic. I'm Maureen Cornelis, and together we will engage with people who dedicate their lives to climate justice and making a just energy transition happen. They may be activists, scientists, policymakers, or other enthusiasts, just like you. Let their life stories and insights inspire you to build a better future for people and the planet. Camille Defard stands as a prominent figure in European energy policy, currently leading the Jacques Delors Energy Center. Her expertise, honed through a rich blend of academic and professional pursuits, uniquely positions her at the forefront of shaping the EU's energy landscape. Camille's insight into energy policy are deepened by her diverse professional background. So far, her career has spanned across continents, including project finance roles in Africa's renewable energy sector and as an economic attaché in East Africa. In her latest report for the Jacques Delors Institute, Energy Union 2.0 to deliver the European Green Deal, Camille advocates for a transformative approach to the EU's energy policy, aligning it with the challenges of climate neutrality, energy security, and competitiveness. Sounds exciting for nerds like me. Camille, thank you so much for being here with us today. Welcome to Energetic.
Thank you, Marin.
Camille, so what would you define as kind of pivotal moments and key experience in your career that has shaped your view and approach towards EU's energy policy? I mean, 2024 is quite an important year for energy policy, for energy democracy in general. So what is your personal view and how have you feel that you have grown to this moment in particular?
Well, what a big question. I would say that I've noticed how energy policy is addressed, and I think there has always been a missing dimension or a dimension that hasn't been as addressed as the others, which is citizens. That I know it's a topic close to your heart as well, but how citizens really can shape policies, but also how their concerns can be better integrated into energy policy. And I think that's why one of the pillar of the report that I've wrote on EU energy policies ahead of the next European election really is improved governance and improved democratic tools. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think there's this missing dimension of people who can shape the transition.
Yeah, it's absolutely music to my ears, and I'm glad that this kind of topic has now become way more mainstream, because 10 years, 15 years ago, it was something that was totally overlooked. And we've had many conversations in this podcast about really how, let's say, energy has shifted from, let's say, a purely technical issue to some form of a climate issue, to also kind of a citizen issue. And that's exactly the kind of bridges that you have been building through the Jacques Delors Energy Center over the years. So could you tell me more about really the Jacques Delors Energy Center, about the Jacques Delors Institute, maybe also about Jacques Delors, because he passed away recently, and I'm sure, I mean, there are many things in his legacy that we still need to embrace and think about for the future as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the Energy Center really comes from Jacques Delors' impetus on greater energy, European energy policy. So when he came back from the European Commission in 1995, he decided to create a think tank working on European integration in Paris. And so this is the Jacques Delors Institute. And within the Jacques Delors Institute, he kept being involved and giving direction of where the European Union should go. And already back in 2010, he had this visionary a move to call for European energy community that would later become an energy union when it will be it was taken up by Donald Tusk 4 years later in 2014. And then taken up by the Juncker Commission with the creation of the Energy Union that really had the objective of strengthening a common approach to energy topics. And already at the time, I need to highlight that Jacques Delors was an extraordinary visionary, because when reading what he wrote and what he thought back in 2010, with the eyes of today, it is striking to see how clear he was on the challenges, both on the geopolitical side, but also on the social side and the economic side. So I would say already back then, he was advocating for a common approach to gas purchase, but also common gas strategic reserves to strengthen the external dimension of the European Union on the energy side. And regarding the social dimension, I think it's really in the DNA of the Jacques Delors Institute, given Jacques Delors' vision and strong commitment to the social justice. The social and citizen dimension really come natural to our work. He's always been advocating for a greater representation of citizens' interest and the social dialogue to improve our policy decisions. So yeah, I mean, I think it fits really well, both in terms of how to have a united and fair and just approach to the energy challenges that we're facing now. And together with Jacques Delors, we are still convinced that the European Union is the right level for action. And I think it showed, it proved right over and over the past years that the European Union is the right level to answer deep geopolitical disruptions, energy crisis, but also the challenge of a fair transition. And indeed, I think we've seen also that the climate ambition came from the EU level over the past years. And now there's still the challenge of taking this ambition from the EU to national and local levels. And I think that's where the citizen dimension becomes critical. And beyond the citizen dimension, of course, there are stakeholders that are working every day on very critical topics. I'm thinking about municipalities. I'm thinking about trade unions and stakeholders such as NGOs, be they climate-oriented or social-oriented. All of them have a role to play. And I must admit that I see increasingly a very, very interesting moves from the business side, and green businesses really committed to a more ambitious climate action.
Wow, that's really super inspiring because it feels that Jacques Delors and the work that you are doing is really, starting with the foundations really of the energy transition, the security of supply, really putting still people at the center. And it's really like this kind of step-by-step approach that is also very, very unique and very, very European at the same time. So it's really like making really energy policy one of the cornerstones of EU policy in general. And that it's of course something that I've kind of witnessed over the years, but I'm sure that many of our listeners are not aware how important energy policy is for now for the foundations of the European Union. And in your latest report, so I will put the link in the show notes, so you advocate for some form of a strategic overhaul of the EU's energy policy, and you want, of course, you aim for addressing the triad of challenges, which are the energy transition necessary for to address the climate challenges, and also the security of supply, and also EU competitiveness. But it's also about social justice, right? So, Camille, can you tell us more about this report and how do you envision this kind of more integrated and goal-oriented energy and climate governance for the EU? And what kind of strategy are you suggesting? And also give us a little bit of context regarding the elections and why this report matters now. Maybe we could reflect on the past, on what the von der Leyen Commission just is wrapping up now and how it's looking for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Marine. So yes, indeed, I think we've seen, and the report really starts with analyzing the EU response to the succession of crises that we've seen over the past 4 years. We've had, on top of climate emergency, we've had a pandemic, we had weaponization of gas and war in Ukraine. We had more challenging geo-economic contexts with the adoption of the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and a rising awareness of Chinese domination over clean tech supply chains. And so all of this actually made the European Green Deal, that was meant to address the climate emergency, a solution to this succession of crises that were, of course, unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really interesting to highlight how the von der Leyen Commission really fought for the European Green Deal every time it was challenged by external crises. And we've seen the unprecedented recovery plan with Next Generation EU that really contributes to filling the green public investment gap up to 2026. We've had Repower EU initiative that was adopted right away as after the start of the war in Ukraine, that really means to accelerate the phase out of Russian fossil fuels together with the green transition. And I think it wasn't really necessarily the move that would have been adopted. Now it's easy to look back, but I think it's really a very strong wins for the green transition to have won this narrative and policy orientation fight. So
it was really striking to see that, there was the Green Deal when the Commission started back in 2019, and there was this Green Deal announced. And then almost immediately after every crisis made it an opportunity to boost the Green Deal and not really diminish it and not to reduce its impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that, but I mean, if we hadn't had all this crisis, we wouldn't have such a Green Deal, because even Repower EU actually increased the ambition, I mean, at least the Commission's ambition on the Fit for 55 package. So in terms of outcome, we've seen really great progress. What we can say now that we are coming to the end of this Commission's and European Parliament term is that the objectives that you've mentioned, the objectives of the Energy Union and European energy policy are under threat. For the first one, which is climate neutrality, we need to triple pass emission reduction rate over the next years, which is a great challenge, and that will require an ambitious implementation of all the files that have been adopted at the EU level. And we see that that can bring up challenges at the member state level, because we have difference in terms of technical, human, and financial resources that can really hinder the push from the European level. On the energy security side, we're still very dependent on imported fossil fuels, and we are now increasingly aware of our vulnerability to clean tech supply chains that are very much concentrated and oftentimes in China. And together with, we made progress in terms of EU coordination, we still lack a European energy security strategy to address these two issues. And lastly, on the price side, we need to keep prices competitive and affordable for businesses and households. And we see that we have a structural lack of competitiveness and an investment wall to go through to realize, to implement the green transition. Green technologies, they have a higher investment cost and lower operational cost. So in the long term, we'll be fine. But for now, going from a high carbon intensive system to a low carbon system will require more investment, all things equal. So there are distributional issues and social and political acceptability challenges. And this is why the report really advocates for more European efforts, because the finding that we highlight is that despite the progress, EU tools are too national, too temporary. For example, we think of the EU Recovery Fund that really won't continue after 2026 and needs to create a gap in terms of green public finance. EU tools are too voluntary, and EU tools are limited to the regulatory tools, which need to be complemented with technical, human, and financial support from the EU level as well. So this is why there's one big recommendation is to strengthen common approach to energy at the EU level with 3 key recommendations: stronger governance, common funding and democratic tools.
Yeah, no, I think it's already super so it's very super clear that so far many of the successes we have are based on some kind of temporary tools and not structural tools, and we need those tools to become really structural. And the problem is that with the upcoming elections, maybe certain parties will make everything for those tools not to become structural, which would be huge challenges, of course, for Europe's position as, regarding climate change and as really one of the strongest voices acting against climate change and really about this kind of leadership that it shows, making those enormous, let's say, climate, economic, geopolitical issues a potential really threat in the long term. And yes, whereas in the short term, as you said, there are some things that are really not evident. So it's really about shaping a narrative that demonstrates that we need to keep on pushing for certain things to happen, and for them to happen in a very, let's say, a comprehensive way. And you mentioned different orientations, let's say it this way. Let's start maybe with funding and investment. So there is an issue about EU budgeting. You said that many tools and instruments were kind of ad hoc and we would end in 2026. So how can we increase EU budgeting, EU clean investment? That would eventually lead us to more resilience, maybe more prosperity as well. And you also suggest, I think, a sovereignty fund. So how would that look like, really?
Yeah, so funding really goes together with improved governance, but we can come back to that afterwards. But indeed, we have a very well identified funding gap at the European level that has been highlighted by many experts and other think tanks over the course of the years. As the crises were piling up, we've seen that investment needs also increased. And we see that accelerating the phase out of Russian fossil fuels, accelerating the transition because of the war in Ukraine, actually requires more investments from the EU level. And so the think tank Agora Energiewende back in 2022 was advocating for a sovereignty fund of 100 billion euros until 2027, so over 3 years. So we see that it's from a German think tank, very strong expertise that we're advocating for such an additional envelope. So we are far from there, unfortunately, because fiscal policy and EU budget is really decided in the Council, in the European Union, current architecture with the unanimity. So it's a very difficult discussions that are ongoing now at the political level. And I wanted to fit in this debate and this discussion by showing how high the consensus is among experts, among financial institutions as well. We've seen the ECB also with a staff paper asking for an EU energy and climate security fund of 500 billion euros until 2030. So it's quite uncontroversial, the fact that we need more action. We need to finance joint infrastructure projects, electric grids, pan-European clean tech support schemes to answer the Inflation Reduction Act that really has this feature that is quite attractive for emergent technologies. So on this financing issue, I think it's the most uncontroversial measure that we put forward. And I think it's the European Commission is actually well aware of that, because the Sovereignty Fund was actually in the Ursula von der Leyen State of the Union speech back in 2022 already. So yeah, it's been floating around, but unfortunately, again, in the discussions among national governments in the Council really didn't come up with anything ambitious. And we see that the small initiative that came out of this idea of sovereignty fund is the STEP, so the strategic platform for the finance technologies, which has been further reduced in the past council meeting on the 14th and 15th December. So we don't see anything bright on this side currently. in political discussions. This is also why I think European elections are really a window of opportunity to really have this debate and take this debate out of closed doors meetings in the council and small room meetings among the think tanks. And so there's an issue also with the timing of putting this debate within the public debate and broader debates to really also have future MEPs take up this idea of having more European solidarity in terms of funding, because solidarity cannot only be a narrative. And I think this is also something that Jacques Delors said when we had the COVID crisis, is that Europe will either be more united or decline. And I think this is quite a well shared analysis among university academics and think tanks currently.
What you just said about finance being an enabler for everything, for all the rest to happen, is exactly what was shared among many parties at the COP in Dubai, the COP28 in Dubai in December 2023. And it feels that I really wanted to start by this point because it feels very much like it's the kind of the last mile and really the thing that we need to, as people who care about climate and want to make a step forward, as really the thing that will kind of make or break the climate solution and the approaches that we need, etc. So the momentum is growing around climate finance and different tools that we need for the energy transition to happen concretely in people's lives. And as you said, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, it's quite impressive. I mean, I think I will need to have somebody from the US tell us a little bit more about that in the podcast soon enough, because it seems that there is so much that can happen, but with limited finance and not well articulated tools, the status quo remains the same, whereas we actually need to push forward. But as you said, there is another important dimension regarding finance, which is the governance side, and the fact that the discussion about how funds are allocated do not stay within the same closed doors, but the discussion becomes really democratic somehow. So one of the things you advocate for in this paper is also the kind of broader democratic participation with, for instance, citizen assemblies, stakeholder dialogues, and how important they are to shape EU policies. And now we understand that when you mean energy policies, you also mean the money that goes into those kind of policies. So why do you think this dimension is so significant? And what kind of impact the kind of platforms that you were suggesting in your paper can have on implementation?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely nailed the key point here, is that if we have funds, we need to ensure that they are effectively used to achieve our objective, which is climate neutrality, while ensuring energy security and reasonable prices. So indeed, there is issues, and already, for example, from the Next Generation EU implementation, so the recovery funds, we see that a part of these recovery funds were earmarked for the green transition. And we see already that there is a lack of capacity at the local level to really lead these green projects that are more complex to implement. So we see that there's teams needed, but there's also potentially teams that are too small to actually handle additional tasks related to the transition, because we are now entering this new era of having to implement many green projects at the same time and at a pace that we haven't been doing before. So I think governance really comes together with financing, because we need to improve the effectiveness of the funds, the way they are spent, so to ensure that we really contribute efficiently to the transition. And for that, improved stakeholder participation, skills, and sufficiently staffed teams in administrations is really key. But maybe let me focus on on stakeholder participation first. We see increasingly that EU funding could be based on national planning. We've seen that with the recovery plan. We now see that with the social climate plans that need to be drafted. And unfortunately, we see the same gaps in terms of stakeholder and participation guarantees replicated in the social climate fund. So the key issue with involving properly stakeholder implementation is that some of them, such as municipality, local authorities, will be co-implementers of the fund. So if they are not properly involved in shaping the measures and investments, there's more chances that these measures and these investments will not be properly implemented, either because they are not aligned with local needs or because there are needs that haven't been addressed at the local level, for example, the lack of skills or staff or capacity. So it is key really to improve the efficiency and the quality of spending, to really work on greater stakeholder participation so that they can raise their concerns and also contribute to improving the way these funds are spent. And this is why with the upcoming Fit for 55 implementation, with many new regulations to implement on building renovation, on phasing thermal cars, there is really a key issue with creating spaces where national stakeholders, be they municipalities, finances, banks, green businesses, trade unions, NGOs, a space where they can meet and discuss the challenges that they face, and so that they can also interact closely with national governments to really contribute to co-creating and co-implementing these huge changes. The challenges are so huge that we really need levels of collective action that are completely unprecedented. And I think we have a strong basis for that in the European Union. We already have good practices of multi-level governance, but we just need to strengthen that to really achieve our objectives.
Yeah, because the risk is, I mean, the elections, they always, so they are upcoming in June, and I hope all our listeners who can actually vote will go vote and will be motivated by what you just say. But really, the elections, they are about the dimension that people can actually see and perceive. Many people don't have the big picture, but they will vote for something that they can actually fathom, they can actually embrace. And if you really want people to embrace the opportunities that have been developed through the various instruments that you mentioned, such as the Fit for 55 package, the Green Deal, etc., you really need for them to be part of the conversation. And many of the things happen at the local level. And in the meantime, we also know that there is a lot of challenges related to this kind of not in my backyard perception, that you don't want anything built behind you. I mean, recently I read the term banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. Which means some form of enormous discontent regarding the energy transition, regarding actually addressing climate change, whereas we actually need those tools. So do you think that this kind of, let's say, more stakeholder dialogues, but you also mentioned citizen assembly, could be the right way to kind of deal with those forms of discontent? Because, I mean, many of those discontents are legitimate. I'm not saying it, but I think it's really important for the people to understand also the big picture, to feel that they are being listened to. Like, you think that the European Commission needs to be more into this kind of active listening approach rather than kind of perceived top-down approach?
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we need both approaches, both top down and bottom up. But I think the bottom up approach is it should really be strengthened in the next years. And indeed, there are so addressing the discontent. I think it really is about perceived justice, and it is going to be the same for, I think, pretty much any kind of climate policy or any kind of policy. But if you perceive that, well, you have a windmill in your backyard, but some people are enjoying it and you are not, then it can create frustration. I think we are able to accept, change if we feel that everybody's doing their share. And this is why I really believe that citizen assemblies at the European level, but also at the local, regional and national level can really help recreating spaces where citizens can meet. As you know, but maybe I can just precise this for your audience, citizen assemblies are composed of randomly chosen citizens that are representative of the society in terms of socially, economically, and in terms of age and so on. So the idea is really to recreate a sample of the society that really represents the diversity of life experiences and make a space for them to actually interact with one another, as well as to create this space protected from vested interests to interact with experts and also having experts interact with regular citizens. And I think this two-side conversation is really important because we sometimes see experts a bit disconnected from what's happening on the ground and the life experience of people. And since we see massive changes that we need to undertake for the transition that will impact the way we live, the way we work, the way we move, then it's really important to include in the picture everyone's life experience and perspective. And we need to address the current inequality in terms of political inclusion, where we always hear the same people or the same concerns, and we silence or disregard other concerns. So there's a really key political political and I would say institutional issue, because we've seen citizen assemblies really giving great results in terms of the social acceptability of the citizens involved towards regulatory obligations, for example, or sufficiency measures that aren't really favored by current policymakers. So I think it is a really interesting tool to rebalance this debate and show that what are the options, what are the concerns of the citizens, what are the alternatives, and what could be the policy designs that could work. Because I think we can't think anymore one policy measure with one policy measure. It needs to be a mix. It needs to be an obligation with social compensation, with green subsidies that really creates an enabling framework for change for everyone to actually be able to access alternatives and also accept changes that are necessary. So again, I'm talking about institutional change because I think citizen assemblies really need to be closely tied to the decision-making process, because this is one of the critiques that can really, that has been raised quite often against these schemes they are disconnected from policy decisions and therefore do not have any impact. So there's this idea of having permanent citizen assemblies at the EU level that could maybe be synchronized with State of the Energy Union address, for example, every year, so that are feeding into the work program of the European Commission, or at least having the Commission having a debate based on the recommendations of the Citizen Assembly on climate at the EU level. But indeed, as you mentioned, and I think you're also pushing a lot for that in your work, like hearing concerns is really important. And for now, we have more consultation phases that really don't really lead to any dialogue. And this is where the political frustration can really go.
So a lot of food for thought. And as we are, this podcast is reaching to its end, I would really like to hear what is your view as Camille and what makes you really hopeful for the months and years to come.
Well, I've put a lot of my thinking in this report. So I would say that I really believe that the ecological transition challenge is more social, political, and institutional challenge than anything else. And we need the institutions to address this content. We need the institutions to address the lack of political inclusion of many citizens and many interests to have a stronger democracies. And I think if we don't have strong democracies that can really foster solidarity and cooperation, then we are likely to fail on the transition. And what gives me hope these days is potentially that the European election can lead to more, to a less gloomy future for the European Union, and that the European Union can really keep being an ambitious leader on the climate side by integrating further the social and political dimension of the transition.
Thank you so much, Camille. This was a super inspiring and rich conversation, and I enjoyed it very, very much. So I will put everything in the show notes. If there are any other resources that you would like to share, please let me know. And for anybody who would like to reach out to you, you're of course available on LinkedIn. I think you are also on Twitter, well, X. But yeah, see you very, very soon. And thank you so much for all those super insightful information.
Thank you, Marine.
Thanks for listening to Energetic. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into sustainability and the just energy transition with the most inspiring stakeholders. All links and resources are in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you like this podcast, why not recommend it to a friend or a colleague? To continue the conversation, head on over to Twitter or LinkedIn. Thank you for lending your ears. That's all for this episode. Until next time.